Hey everyone, back in the next installment of the Ultimate Strategy Guide for Command & Conquer 3 Kanes Wrath. And in this installment I'm going to be breaking down all the different factions. And I'm going to start right away. I'm going to start with the GDI. So first thing I noticed about GDI is their early game ability is very strong, meaning they can rush very well, and their tier 1 units are strong, like right off the bat. Things like predator rushes, orca rushes, missile infantry rushes, all that sort of things make GDI a very strong rushing faction. Now when you're playing with GDI, you want to keep in mind that you don't have to stick to the rush, but if you're playing someone like Skrin or some of the Nod factions, they might be able to beat you in the late game. This means that if it does go into the late game, meaning tier 3, then you're going to want to be quite smart about it, which means you can't really go head on with a Skrin late game, because the Skrin late game will crush you, because it's much stronger. It has things like tripods, superior air, all that sort of stuff. So with GDI, you want to keep the harassment going all the time, which sounds funny, but basically means if it gets into the late game, stuff like Firehawks, keep harassing with Firehawks, keep him coming, take out his tech center, don't let him rebuild his tech center. Even every time he rebuilds his tech center, bomb it with Firehawks. Stuff like that. Use powers, use special things that the GDI can do, like that big ass orbital drop thing. I'm not even sure what it's called, but it's pretty damn cool. Stuff like that. Keep harassing your opponent. Don't even let him build a single tripod if you're playing against a Skrin. So that's what you got to do with GDI if it goes into the late game. You want to keep them on their toes. Mix up your units. Keep a balance of air units, ground units, and anti-air units, anti-infantry units, and anti-tank units. Keep a balance, because you can't really stick with one for GDI because their late game is not that strong. Upgrades, of course. Upgrade your GDI units. If you want to make their late game stronger, you need to upgrade them, such as predator tanks and mammoth tanks. Railguns, people. Upgrade it with railguns. If you want to go to the late game, you might build 100 predator tanks. Okay, well, they could be crushed by quite a few by half the amount of tripods. Okay, so what do? Upgrade them with railguns. There you go. You haven't increased their defense at all, but their attack has increased immensely, and this can help you out a lot. It costs money, but the only reason you tech anyway is because you have the money to do it. So that's what you got to do with GDI. GDI, rushing, guys. Rush early on with GDI, no question. Don't just sit in your base and tech, you will not survive. Rush early on, hamper your opponent's economy, make sure that going into the late game, you have more money than he does, and you already have more units than he does. And don't drag the game out too long. Okay? So, I'm going to go into Nod now. Nod are a great all-around faction. They're not good in anything specific, rushing, teching. They're good in both. Their mid-game, however, the mid-game is something to be feared. Mid-game is something that GDI and Skrin don't really have much of, but Nod have a good mid-game. Stuff like stealth units and shadow teams and all that sort of stuff make Nod like a faction to be feared, really. Stuff like shadow teams in the late game can really piss you off. They're very strong. Stuff like stealth tanks late on. Awesome. If you can sneak around 5 stealth tanks to your opponent's base, and you can take out all his harvesters with that easily, with 5 stealth tanks. Bam, there you go. You just effectively kind of won the game, and you've effectively pissed off your opponent quite a bit. So with Nod you can afford to sort of let the game drag on a bit, just because of the fact that you can always fall back on your stealth abilities, and you can fall back on your Tiberium missile strikes and all that shit you can do. I've forgotten what that's called as well, sorry. Vapor bombs. Yes, you can fall back on vapor bombs. You got all that stuff to play around with. You've got stealth tanks, you've got venom Venom are awesome if you can upgrade them fully. You've got EMP strikes, all that sort of stuff you have with Nod. So guys, be diverse. Don't just stick with one thing with Nod. Get everything. Keep your units, you know, try and have one of every type of unit in your arsenal. Seriously, that might be going a bit overboard, but seriously guys, because Nod, if you have a whole bunch of different units with Nod, the combinations that you can come up with are insane. They are absolutely insane, guys. So you want to play around with them a bit. Get a feel for them when you're playing. Get a feel for what combinations work for you and what combinations don't. Because you've got a lot of units to play around with Nod. So going on to Skrin now. Skrin are a faction which are good in the late game. They're sort of a steamroller faction. They're sort of a hit 'em hard, hit 'em head on, go toe to toe with Mike Tyson type of faction, you know. They have very strong units. Stuff like Devourer tanks, Corruptors, are they called Corrupts? I don't know, those things which spray Tiberium which can heal your units. I've forgotten what those things are called, but stuff like that. Stuff like tripods, stuff like Devastator warships, planetary assault carriers, all those sort of things, they can all be upgraded with shields, with force fields. Skrin are immensely strong faction in the late game. Like I said, rushing, of course, you can rush with every faction, and you should rush with every faction to give yourself an advantage. But with Skrin, their late game is very, very strong. So with Skrin, you almost always want to bring it into the late game, which brings to fast teching. If you want to tech fast, Skrin are the faction to do it, because they have the units to back you up with. You see, they have a very, very strong air units and ground units, and if you keep a balance of both, it's kind of unbeatable. Imagine if you send 5 Devastator warships to an opponent's base. It's not going to do shit, because of course they'll take out some units, but if he's got anti-air on the ground, they're toast. Think about this: if you send 5 Devastator warships and 5 tripods, tripods take out all the anti-air on the ground, and the Devastator warships just totally destroy the base. There you go, perfect combo. Things like the Skrin Commando, which is very, very strong, which can, I've forgotten what it's called as well. What is the Skrin Commando called? I don't know, who cares. This is strong, it can mind control units. Even one of the factions, I think it's Traveler 59, it can mind control an entire area. That's crazy, guys. Imagine if you got 5 tanks in your base. You can really save your own ass by cranking a commander out, controlling them. And there you go, you're just taking over 5 mammoth tanks. But another thing with the Skrin Commando is what you can do. It's one of those units which you're not going to keep alive for a long time because it's weak. But it's one of those things which you can do. You can rush it into the enemy base, control his tech center, sell it off, rush it out of there. A few minutes later, rush it in, get his MCV, rush it out of there. Eventually it will die, but if you got a commando, make sure you at least manage to capture a tech center with it, and then you should be happy. Losing a tech center in the late game, trust me, some people even leave because of that. Now the thing about Skrin is their epic unit is very strong, and you can garrison a commando in your epic unit, which means you can build another commando. So you can have one on the ground and one in your epic unit, and your epic unit can teleport. I think it's called the Eradicator. Yeah, I got that one right. But your epic unit can teleport, and then you have your commando on the ground. There's a number of things you can do with Skrin as well, but just keep in mind that steamroller faction when playing factor when playing Skrin. Keep that in mind. So GDI, keep in mind keeping your opponent on their toes, hampering them, harassing them, and rushing all the time, and having a strong early game. Nod, all around game. Keep in mind the stealth abilities, and all the diverse types of units. Skrin, keep in mind that steamroller faction, hitting your opponent head on, going toe to toe with Mike Tyson factor, and awesome. So this concludes the last part of my installment, and check out my other videos. Cheers, guys.